H. Chandler Egan. There was no guarantee that Chandler Egan was going to be a fine golfer, but from age 12, when he first picked up a club on a family vacation in Lake Geneva, young Henry grew into the game, and quickly. That was 1897. Just 5 years later, he's 17, it's 1902, living in Highland Park, and at Harvard, and winning the National Intercollegiate Championship, the individual crown, and leading the Crimson to the team title. A 17-year-old kid doing this, freshman. Late in the summer, as he comes back to beautiful Highland Park, just turned 18, he goes out to Chicago Golf Club and captures the Western Amateur. Clearly, Ace Chandler Egan, this teenager, was going to be a player to watch. Spurred on by his cousin Walter, whom he had beaten at Chicago Golf and who he would spar with in major amateur championships for the rest of the decade, Chandler Egan would compile the best record of any amateur player in the first 20 years of American golf. Representing Exmoor, he would win 4 Western Amateurs, including consecutive titles in 1904 and 1905. In 2 of those victories, he was also the stroke play medalist. He doubled up by winning the U.S. Amateur as well in 1904 and 1905, the first player to win the 2 significant amateur majors in this continent in the same year, and the only player who has ever done it in consecutive years. 1904 was a great year for Egan. Along with the Western and U.S. Ams, he led Harvard to a 3rd straight college championship and helped the WGA team to the Olympic golf title at Glen Echo in St. Louis, finished 2nd individually. So a silver medal of his own to go with the team gold. Think of that next summer when we're watching the golf from Rio. They'll be chasing after that team title that Egan won on behalf of the Western Golf Association. He graduated from Harvard, and now comes the hard part. You got to go to work. But he still found time to win the 1907 Western Amateur, and 2 years later was runner-up to another Illinois Golf Hall of Famer, Robert Gardner of Hinsdale, in the USAM. And then for a short time, he stopped playing. Within the space of 2 years, he got married, he moved to Oregon, he bought an orchard and turned to farming, perhaps influenced by his father's career growing roses. Farming didn't go as well as expected, but he made roses out of it in another way. He found a home in Medford, Oregon, returning to golf not only as a player, but this time with the pencil and paper of a golf architect in hand. And with no previous experience, Egan jumped in, designed Tualatin Country Club in 1912, and went on from there to design courses in Oregon, Washington, and California. He was as successful as a designer as he was a player, and he picked up where he left off in that department as well, beating a man by the name of Jack Neville for the 1915 Pacific Northwest Amateur title, to reverse the result of the year before. He would win 5 Pacific Northwest AMs across 3 decades, and also won the California Amateur of 1926 at Pebble Beach. I bring that up for a reason. Neville, you might recall, was the man who first designed Pebble Beach. Well, 2 years after Egan won that California Am, he was back there redesigning it in conjunction with Robert Hunter. They remade 16 holes of the 18 at Pebble, including that famous stretch along Carmel Bay that goes out to the turn, and all the way back to the famous 17th hole. All that in advance of that 1929 U.S. Amateur. Egan played in it, made it all the way to the semifinals. And 5 years later, as a reward, he was finally named to a Walker Cup team. They went to St. Andrews. He played in 1 match. He won it. His best original design might have been Eugene Country Club. Among his last were North Fulton down in Georgia and West Seattle, which is very highly regarded. He was working on the Legion Memorial course in Everett, Washington in 1936. Caught a cold. He went to the hospital. They called it pneumonia. 6 years later, he was gone at age 51. 16 months later, August of 37, a group of friends gathered at Rogue Valley Golf Club in Medford, his home club. He had designed it back in 24 to pay tribute. Among the celebrants, 2-time Masters champion Horton Smith, future U.S. Open champion Lawson Little, Grantland Rice, the famed writer, and Bobby Jones. Rice summed it up this way. He called H. Chandler Egan, quote, one of the finest gentlemen I have ever known. And the passing years, now that we remember him, have only enhanced that notion. On his behalf tonight, happy to say we have 2 acceptances. We shall start first with the club historian of Exmoor Country Club, Don Holton.
Chick Evans, one of golf's greatest players, founder of the Evans Scholars Program, and a member of this Hall of Fame, wrote in 1930 about the first time he met Chandler Egan a quarter century before. Chick recalled, "I was a small caddy at the old Edgewater Club on Chicago's North Side in 1904 when I saw my first national amateur champion close at hand." Now picture Chick, he's with a group of fellow caddies in the corner, and they know that the national champion is coming to the club. And Chick writes, in recalling, he said, "H. Chandler Egan, such a champion, handsome, graceful, and young, with the manners and bearing of a prince." The manners and bearing of a prince. What an impression it must have made. Egan was the first golfer from Chicago to win a national championship in the East, Chick wrote, and that fact, in the red letter H of Harvard University on his sweater, made an unforgettable impression. H. Chandler Egan. What magic in that name. 5 years later, in 1909, Chick, then himself a rising star at age 19, would face his boyhood idol in the semifinals of the U.S. Amateur at the Chicago Golf Club, taking Egan to the final hole with Chandler winning one up. After the match, Egan fainted, collapsing in the locker room from food poisoning. Chick rushed to revive him, and they remained friends until Egan's untimely death in 1936 at age 51. Exmoor Country Club in Highland Park was Chandler Egan's home club, where he learned the game of golf as a junior player and rose to the pinnacle of the sport and a #1 amateur ranking in 1910. Followed by the society pages almost as much as the sports pages, Egan brought national attention, new players, and a certain luster to the emerging game of golf while establishing Illinois as a center of golf excellence with a cadre of top players to be reckoned with back in the day. Egan's achievements, outlined by Tim Cronin, make him worthy of tonight's recognition. All of us at Exmoor are grateful to the Illinois section of the PGA, its foundation, and the selection committee. We're also thankful for the generosity of Egan's grandsons, Morris and Chandler Everett, and their families of Cleveland. They've enabled Exmoor to display many of our great champions' medals and trophies, and I welcome any of you to visit our club to see this marvelous display. But the list of achievements that Tim noted don't convey the other qualities that make him all the more deserving of this honor, namely his personal character and the respect he earned from friends and opponents alike. Even after his bitter defeat in the Olympic finals in St. Louis in 1904, Chandler was magnanimous. He said, inasmuch respecting the game of golf as his opponent, he said Mr. Lyon, referring to George Lyon, the Canadian who won, was more clever than I, and he deserved to win. Chan, as his friends called him, remained as ever the quiet class act. He also contributed to the game that we love, serving 2 different terms on the board of the United States Golf Association. His first term when he was elected to the executive committee at the young age of 25. Upon learning of Egan's death, the famous Scottish golf writer Scott Chisholm said, "My heart bleeds to know that Chandler Egan is no more. He possessed every fine and gracious quality of a true champion. In the heat of a match, he would choose to help a competitor, not hinder him. His conduct on the course was a great example to our youth." This may be why Chandler Egan, so widely regarded in the golf world, was chosen at age 49 for the Walker Cup team in 1934 that Tim mentioned. The great Bobby Jones, a full generation younger than Egan, admired the ideal of his friend Chandler Egan, that is, the successful amateur golfer, playing strictly for the love of the game, with Egan perhaps serving as an example for Jones' latest career, a career that made him our greatest amateur champion. When Egan died, Jones issued the following statement, a brief one from his Atlanta law office, saying, "It is such a shock to know that so grand a fellow is gone. We will miss him terribly. To those of us who revere Chandler Egan, family and fellow club members alike, we may miss him for various reasons. But now with this honor tonight, with the permanent plaque on the wall in the hall, we've gained something lasting, something fully consistent with the purpose of this Hall of Fame. And maybe this is all that any of us can hope for when we're gone from this world, and that is that we will remember an inspirational figure, a sportsman, a gentleman, and a golf champion. We will remember Henry Chandler Egan, and for this, we thank you.
And now, second, on behalf of the Egan family, and Don mentioned that they're here, we are delighted to introduce to you H. Chandler Egan's grandsons, Chandler Everett and Morris Everett Jr.
With wonderful professionals like Mr. McNair and Mr. Saab here, I thought that I might try and be my grandfather in thanking you all. The Illinois Golf Hall of Fame honoring me this way is absolutely wonderful. This is where I grew up. This was my home. I spent most of my life in the Pacific Northwest, but this is where my roots were. This is where I had a chance to play at my beloved Exmoor, where I was able to hone my skills so I could go off to Harvard and be able to play there. It's where I have gained my greatest and earliest and most successful honors. Yes, I was a failure as a farmer, and a few other things too. But I had a chance when I was out there to learn the skills of golf course architecture. So I will tell you one small story that's kind of fun. When I had a chance in 1929 to help redesign Pebble Beach, they gave me the 7th hole to be mine. And if you remember the 7th, it's the one that drops right down to the ocean, and depending on the wind, you either hit a 4-iron or a sand wedge. And I designed it to have 34 separate small pot bunkers all around the green. Well, the membership started to play the course and said, "This is absolutely ridiculous. We can't play this hole. It looks like somebody with measles." And so they had to take my design and completely change it. And that's why you see today the 3 huge traps around the green. One last thing I would like to do before I turn the microphone over to my other grandson, and that is to thank Don Holton of the Exmoor Club. He has become a wonderful friend to my grandchildren. He has become their Uncle Donald. He has opened places in their knowledge about me, and I never met my grandchildren because I died before they were born. But he has been so wonderful to them, so gracious, so competent, and so cordial. And so I, as their grandfather, thank you, Uncle Donald.
I also want to thank Don, but I also want to thank Jim Allen, who's done an awful lot of work of helping to get us all here tonight. Thank you, Jim. When my mom, Chandler Egan's only child, was contacted in her early 90s, she lived to 101. When she was contacted by a Canadian golf writer who somehow found her, really no one knew up to that point that anybody was still living who was a relative of Chandler Egan, so that was a brand new thing. And she was interviewed by him. He wanted a whole bunch of pithy information, and unfortunately, my mother had at that time really sort of forgotten a whole bunch of things. And we now live in that house, the house that I grew up in, that my mom lived in until she was 101. And in going through the things that were in the house, and my mother was the original pack rat, we found things that we had no idea, my brother and my sister and I, that even existed, because we'd asked Mother about, don't you have any things that belong to Chandler Egan, and, you know, she showed me a tennis trophy. He won the tennis championship of Oregon in 1926. Throw that into the mix. And she had a couple of other things, and she had some pictures, and that was about it. So she was gone, and we were looking through all the things that she had, and we found things that she had forgotten that she had. We found the silver 1904 Olympic medal. We found the team 1904 gold medal. We found all kinds of trophies. We found all of his Harvard medals. We found letters back and forth between he and my mom, and things that talked about golf things and decisions that he made. We found 3 scrapbooks full of everything he ever played in that John Holton, when he came to Cleveland, was drooling over. And we are so thrilled to loan what we have to Exmoor, because it's the proper place, really, for what they have today. And I do hope you all, if you haven't seen it already, have a chance to. We are delighted to be here tonight. We think this is a wonderful honor that you've given to our grandfather, and thank you all for coming.